problems. Unless the clerk is up. Yep. Or the news. Yep.
Okay, everybody ready? Start the workshop? So start it off, I'll hand it right off to Kevin.
Geez, just like that. Well, thank you, Mayor. Starting us promptly. I think we have enough material here to probably take us up until time tonight, so we'll get moving ahead. I think before we get going though, I think we'll do some introductions since we have a joint utility advisory board meeting, a few new members. Might be good just to put some faces with some names, so let's see if your mouth isn't full.
I'm good. Alyssa Miller. I almost was at work. City Council, District 3.
John Morset, City Council.
Dan Tolman, Mayor.
Sean Downing, City Council.
Chris Lick, Vice Chair or Chairman of the board, utility board.
Mike Glad, another new member of the advisory board.
Mark Flecker, UAB.
Timothy Turo, UIB. Todd Bierstead, City Council.
Scott Simpson, City Administrator.
Josh Solinger, Finance Director.
Kevin West House Utility Director. Do we want to introduce staff or not? Why don't we do that? Go ahead.
Lynn Nelson, Utility, admin assistant. Jared Nelson, Public Works Manager. Jennifer Smith, Chief of Staff. Amy Peterson, Community Development Director.
Right on time. You're the last one introduced. Oh, Carol. There we go. You know, hear me.
Julie Lake, Community Services Director, City Clerk.
Just McKenzie,
Good. Let's introduce.
Well, I'm John Smith. I'm one of the IT directors. You see, there's.
We can't leave our guest out. We can't leave our guest out.
I really had some call these sweet old bill, but not people that want to take down the dam. Or the ones you put on a holiday in the morning. Either one. Yeah.
Well, Josh and I have put together a little presentation for you tonight on utility rates and where we think we're headed as a utility and as a finance department. I want to present that to you tonight and look for a reaction, kind of where we've been, where we're at, and where we may be going. So Josh and I want to kind of ham and egg this tonight a little bit, and I think we'll start off with Josh on the first couple slides. So Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
And I think too, just to add to that, if everybody's okay with it, I know we tried this with, I think, our fiscal plan, maybe our last fiscal plan workshop, just hold questions until the end, just so we can cover it. It's fairly dense, kind of technical material, and kind of get through it, jot your questions down, and then we'll get to those then at the end. So to start, we're just going to touch on the agenda here. So we're going to go over some objectives and staff assumptions that we want to bring to you to confirm that we're still all on the same page about how we approach utility rates. Brief history of our rate structures, how rates are set, current financial conditions, and next steps. So objectives and assumptions. So before the objectives, we want to provide a refresher to you all for utility rate setting, the roles, the who's involved, the how it gets calculated, things like that. And then, as I mentioned, we do want to check assumptions on how staff plan to proceed. So we're actually going to show you the same slide twice, kind of toward the beginning and then again at the end, because our assumptions are so critical to how we're going to be approaching this. And so actually, I'm going to go ahead and turn it right back over to Kevin.
Yeah, you want to do the advance? So on this one, just click the mouse and make it go.
Yep.
All right, so this very first one on the assumptions. So this is what we're assuming we're moving ahead with. I like this number one, actually. We aim to provide value for quality, reliability, and service. I call this best overall value, right? We're not trying to be the cheapest utility in Wisconsin, but we're trying to provide the best overall value. Reliability, and not just service, but we're providing pretty dang high levels of service. When there's an outage, people are getting basically play-by-play of an outage. And there's not many communities that do that, but I think we are providing high levels of service we have, and we're assuming that's how we're going to continue. There's always a cost that goes with higher levels of service. I stayed very aggressive on our preventive maintenance and promoting economic development. There's a couple really good things in there. So preventive maintenance, for example, sewer cleaning, sewer televising. We have a 4-year rotating plan within our city to clean and televise every bit of sewer in our core areas of town every 4 years. Economic development. In our last rate case, in 2019, 2020 for electric, we did include $60,000 for economic development in our current rates. And we're going to continue to go for that again. We do feel that economic development is a key component to utilities. I think about when I started here 11 years ago, we had about 6,000 customers, and now we have 7,500 customers. Economic development and increasing our rate base is good for all of our ratepayers. So I think it is paying off. New growth will pay for itself, at least in part. This is even more true for water and wastewater, and Josh is going to get into the more details on this as we go. But one of our assumptions is new growth will pay for itself, at least in part, for water and wastewater, mainly electric in part as well, but not quite as much as water, wastewater. We're assuming that we have no new programming, rate philosophies around how water and sewer get paid for, dividends or things like that. Staff will seek to maximize the fixed charge portion of the rate structure. Again, we're going to get into a little more detail on that. But as we talk about conservation, as we talk about less usage with more efficient products, things like that, in the old days, we used to depend on income from usage to pay the freight. When we tell people to use less products, and the usage comes down, as much we want, you still have a system to pay for, so putting more cost on the fixed charge is really what we're going for there. So that's an assumption that we're going to continue to do that. In the end, the Public Service Commission decides what that fixed charge can be. For an example, last rate case, we were going for about $16 a month on electric, we ended up at $12. So anyway, so the Public Service Commission will decide that. Staff, we're not actively seeking change in cost distribution between customer categories. Again, that's what I call rate philosophy. What percentage of our rate are we charging to commercial versus small commercial versus residential? I feel comfortable, Josh feels comfortable with how that's distributed right now. I just want a quick example. Xcel Energy puts more burden on their residential customers than their commercial customers. We feel the way we have it spread across is fair to all customers. You'll see that in a chart coming up that our residential customers spend way less than some of the investor-owned utilities because of their philosophy is put more on residential, less on commercial. So we're not lobbying to have that change. We like where we're at there. And staff intends to maintain volume or time of day discounts where applicable. So let's get right to it. So here's our current residential water rate. If you're up to 4,000 gallons, it's $1.39 per 1,000 gallons. That's not a typo. So we deliver the first 4,000 gallons of water to you at $1.39 cold fresh delivered per 1,000 gallons. That's $5.56 plus $8 service charge. So if you're a 4,000 gallon a month water customer, that's $13.56. That's got to be the best value for commodities I know. Next tier, $1.80. Next tier, $2.56. You can see an ascending tier. This is the Public Service Commission's what they call a conservation rate with an ascending tier for residential customers. They're thinking that the higher the cost, it's going to be a signal to use less. Whether or not that's happening, I'm not sure, but that's the reason for tiered rates there. It's descending on commercial. And say, well, why is that? And part of the reason is it costs us less to serve some of these very large users. So it's $1.11 per 1,000. And the higher the user, it's 1 meter, 1 customer. It actually costs utility less to serve those people. So that's the reason for that on water. Electric rates. Let's go to the bottom one first. The standard rate at 11.1 cents a kilowatt hour. That's our standard rate today for a standard electric customer. You can choose this time of day rate. It's actually called nights and weekends now, and where you can go 19 cents a kilowatt hour on peak and 6 cents an hour on off peak. Believe it or not, we actively kind of look at folks' electric usage throughout the year, and we'll send letters to 150 to 200 customers and say, hey, you might be better off at that time of day rate. You might want to consider that and save yourself a few dollars. So we actively try to get people on that rate. We don't have a ton on that rate, but it's out there for people that want to try to use And then you can see for large power customers, these larger ones up here, a lot of this is gonna be based on demand too. So these high demands that they have throughout the day, and then it sets a benchmark for their bill. Water, so here's your fixed charges for water, $8 for most residential customers, larger customers, it goes up from there. Electric, residential customers, their flat rate is $12 a month. And again, as it goes up, as you become a larger user. So, wastewater, a little more expensive, $3/4, $16.50 is the flat rate on wastewater. And it goes up again. History, so I'm gonna go one history slide and then I'm gonna turn it back over to Josh. So this question was discussed not that long ago, some questions were raised. So when was the last time we did these rate cases? So electric, there's an asterisk next to 2020 because we started that application in 2019. Because of COVID, we delayed the implementation of that by a little bit. The PSC looks at that though as a rate case of 2019. So now we're past the expedited rate case timeframe as we enter 2024. So it's been about almost 5 years for electric. Water, 2016 was the last time we did a rate case there, and wastewater, 2012. So it's been a while. It's been a while. And again, it's been a while, and here we are sitting on the same rates through this pretty what some would consider hyperinflation period the last 2 years. And I have said to the UAB several times, you know, that the increase may be coming because things are more expensive. So that'll be reflected today. So Josh, I'll turn it back over to you on how rates are set.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the rules, as I mentioned earlier, and a little bit of the how it gets done. So for rules with the electric utility, there's two main entities that we as a city are working with. So there's the Public Service Commission, or PSC, and then WPPI. So fundamentally, PSC's role is to ensure that ratepayers are protected with responsible rate recovery and equity in rate recovery between utilities across the state that they regulate. They authorize rates for electric utilities. So when we do a rate case, it's actually referred to as a rate order. So the PSC will look at our application, they'll produce their own rate study, and then they essentially tell us what our rate structure will be. There's a little bit of room to negotiate that with them, but they don't have to take our feedback when coming up with the rate order. WPPI plays a role in purchased power costs, which influence the utility customer's electric bills separately from the PSC authorized rate of return. So when you look at your utility bill, you may notice a charge or even a credit on there from month to month that's referred to as PCAC, or Power Cost Adjustment Charge. And so what that is essentially that's the way that we pass on the fluctuating costs of purchased power to the customer. And that exists outside of the framework of what the PSC will be authorizing. So you should know that when we talk about rates, when we talk about rate case applications, we aren't really touching on the PCAC piece, although a more updated rate structure may help us avoid some of the fluctuation in the PCAC adjustment you see, because it'll take into account the most recent purchased power expenses that our utility has incurred. And so it could minimize some of the fluctuations. But it is a separate concept, and WPPI plays a key role in that. They also help us with our cost of service studies and with navigating PSC processes. And you know, it is nice because we've got Kevin representing, I guess, the city, but he's on the board of WPPI and he sits on the rate setting committee.
Yep, chair of the rates committee.
So we do have some representation city in that. So then with water, again, it's Public Service Commission. So similar to electric, they, same concept as that first sentence up above. They're ensuring ratepayers are protected, that there's equitable distribution of rates across the state, that it's fair. And they authorize rates for water utilities as well. So same deal with electric. They'll actually come up with a rate order that we then implement as a result of a rate case application. And in addition to the PSC in this case, we don't have WPPI involved here, but we do have the DNR, because they may issue regulatory standards for our utilities that impact the utilities' costs. And then you get down to wastewater, don't have PSC involved, don't have WPPI involved. it really is the city and the DNR in this case. And again, the role the DNR plays is that they may issue regulatory standards such as phosphorus levels. So if those were to, benchmark phosphorus levels were to decrease in the future, they're raising the standard and lowering benchmark levels. We may incur some higher spending because of that. So that's kind of the role the DNR plays, is they may just be setting regulation that causes us to incur more costs. But the city council is responsible for authorizing rates for the wastewater utility, and that's enumerated in the city's code of ordinances. So wastewater, local control, at least over rate setting. Electric and water is not necessarily local control. We can control when we apply, but from there on out, there's not a lot of local control there. So then for electric and water rate setting, so I'm gonna, hopefully you've all stretched out a little bit and had some caffeine, because we're gonna get nerdy here. So this Josh slide. This is a Josh slide. So there's this concept, I've mentioned it, it's rate of return. What rate of return is, because it's the crux of the rate setting process, is it's the PSC's estimate of what a utility, electric or water, needs to operate. And it's based on a percentage of a utility's net investment rate base, or I love to say that word, NIRP. So how you calculate a NIRP is you take the utility's assets, you subtract off the accumulated depreciation, and if there's any PSC regulatory adjustments, which are quite uncommon, we don't have any right now. I'm not aware of any that we're going to be looking at for 2023, since we're in the year-end process, but the factors in, if applicable. So essentially, it's your assets, you back off your depreciation, and you're left with your net investment rate base. In other words, what's the value of your utilities assets if you were just if you had to liquidate all of it today, basically. And so then you can see an example for the electric utility and what the current net investment rate base is estimated for 2023. So then what you end up with is a rate of return that is a percentage of that net investment rate base. So right now, based on October of 2023, and the rate benchmark, the rate of return benchmark is constantly fluctuating. So I think there was a utility that just a couple weeks ago got a rate authorized at 6.22. Yeah. I think when I gave a very similar presentation to this to the UAB, we were at about 6.20. In October, it was 6.5. So you can see that it does kind of bounce around a bit.
And no two utilities really end up being the same either. It's in that range.
Yeah, it's because of the timing in which they're seeking their rate cases. You'll see some fluctuation then in terms of the timing of when the rates are authorized. But it's because they take into account a 3-month rolling average of basically a municipal bond index, and then the PSC adds 2%. And that's basically the PSC's expression to add 2%. There's not a ton of rhyme or reason to it necessarily. So because it's indexed though to a municipal bond index, you tend to see that fluctuation because it's following the interest of municipal bond market. So what you're left with then, if you're going based off of the October 2023 rate of return benchmark of 6.5%, what you're saying is that the PSC is looking for utilities to generate net income that's about 6.5% of their net investment rate base every year. That's the benchmark. So then it's up to every utility's individual financial performance and outcomes to dictate whether they're at that, above that, below it. We've had years, as you'll see, where we've been well above ours. We've had years where we've been below. But it's something that you tend to monitor over years. You're not necessarily looking at any one year per se. So that's the concept of rate of return.
I want to point out there too, Josh, that's not a slush fund. That is the amount of money it takes to operate the utility. So that is operational capital, that rate of return.
So I want to spend, this goes back to one of the assumptions that Kevin touched on, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this because this is a key city philosophy, a policy choice also that that we believe the council and the UAB have kind of upheld for quite some time now. And so we want to just discuss it, and then, we'll be looking for some affirmation that this should continue to be an assumption that we move forward with. So we say that growth pays for itself, at least in part. Now, when we say that, we're really talking about kind of three key buckets of concepts here. The first is that developer contributed assets are excluded from the PSC's net investment rate base or NIRB. So, for example, I think just 1 or 2 council meetings ago, you accepted some improvements as part of the phase 1 Oak Hill subdivision project. And when you have developer contributed assets like that we're accepting, that we're taking ownership of, those actually don't get factored into the net investment rate base. So right now, the water utilities valued net asset after you take into account depreciation at about $15.4 million, but 56% of that rate base is actually developer contributed. These are actually, to get way into the weeds for just a second, we actually portray them separately on our balance sheet, utility financed versus developer financed assets. And only the utility financed asset portion factors into the rate base. So 56% of the utilities assets are not factoring into our rate base. So you're essentially taking, you're not taking 6.5% of 15.4 million, you're taking 6.5% of 15.4 million less 8.7. And that's what you're basing your rate structure off of. So tax increment financing is the second main bucket. So think of Man Valley Corporate Park as I walk through this. So we have borrowed about $14 million for the corporate park. That's water, that's sewer, that's electric, storm, streets. TID 19 is responsible for paying the debt service for all of that, including the utility portion. Now, for the first few years of the TID's life, when we don't yet have development there, the utilities will be paying toward that debt service, but we're treating that as an interfund loan from the utilities to the tax increment district. So in a future year, year 4, 5, 6, as development occurs in the TID, it will be generating sufficient tax increment revenue to begin paying the debt service on behalf of these funds moving forward. So the utilities won't be paying the debt service for utility infrastructure. And then toward the end of the TID's life, it will pay back the utilities for those first few years of debt service payments that they made, plus interest. Because it is a city policy to assess interest against interfund loans, just like we would if we were to borrow on the securities market. So then the third bucket is impact fees and developer financing. Now, they must be used for infrastructure required to serve growth. So you can't take impact fees, and this is by statute, and put it into essentially operating and maintenance costs. It has to be used in a forward-looking sense. You're collecting it from growth. It needs to serve growth. And that's the same with any impact fee that the city collects. We do collect a handful. But it reduces reliance on borrowing, because instead of borrowing for those costs, we're paying for it with cash collected from impact fees. And we're not incurring additional interest expenses to pay debt service in the future. So that can improve net operating income. And when you improve net operating income, you're actually going to produce a higher rate of return, and you're going to forego longer having to do a rate case. And a recent example of that developer financing, at least, is Derek Holmes over on the Thompson Heights annexation that just happened recently. There was about $445,000 in water and wastewater capital costs that the city from the developers. So again, when you were to go back several slides ago and Kevin showed the history of why the city's been able to kind of wait as long as it has in some cases for some of these rate increases, a lot of that is because of what you're seeing on this slide right here. These all play a role in some way, shape, or form in that.
2C, go back to 2C. Josh came by my office and gave me a little note for the IOU. He said you might want to hang on to that one. I'm looking for you. That's fine. That's fair.
So current financial conditions. So, and keep in mind when we talk current financial conditions for 2023, because we are still in the year-end process, it takes months. We haven't, closed the books, so to speak, on the fiscal year yet. Audit is actually coming in just a couple weeks, so we will be closing the book soon, but not quite there yet. So those are portrayed as estimates. Now, when you look at the electric utility, I just want to call your attention to the bottom row of this table. You can kind of walk through the math if you want to see how you get there. But really the main point to call out is that bottom row where it says rate of return. And you can see that the electric utility has been below the current PSE benchmark of 6.5% for all 3 years that we're looking at here. And in addition to that, the rate base has grown by $800,000 since 2021 because we've been expanding kind of the territory of the utility, so to speak, adding additional infrastructure. So, mathematically, if you were to look at that net income or loss row and you look at 2021 and then you compare that to 2023, you'll see that in 23, we actually are estimating we'll have higher net income for the year than we had in 21, but the rate of return is actually lower. And that's because you've got a larger rate base. So that's the impact of a growing utility if you don't adjust rates, is that rate of return can shrink as the value of the asset you need to produce net income against is growing and your net income isn't necessarily keeping pace, even if you're generating positive cash flow. So for the water utility, you can see where I've actually highlighted a couple cells there. In 2022 and 2023, both, the water utility was below the PSC benchmark of 6.5%. Now, we were quite a ways above it in 2021, 8.42. Then we dropped to 4.86. And we're actually forecasting or estimating, rather, negative rate of return for 2020. Now, this does not mean negative cash flow. This doesn't mean the utility is necessarily losing cash. And the reason for that, again, I'm going to get into the weeds here, is this is based off of how the PSC calculates rate of return. So on the expense side, they include depreciation, which is a non-cash expense. And on the revenue side, because all they're really interested in is our rate structure. So all they look at on the revenue side are rate-based revenues. They're not taking into account impact fee revenue, and they're not taking into account any interest earnings that we have, which right now we're earning a lot of interest. Our local government investment pool account, which is essentially the city's savings account, we're earning about 5.3% in interest right now on that. So we earned about $200,000 to $300,000 in interest income in this utility for 23. We had probably another $200,000 to $300,000, maybe even $400,000 in impact fee revenue in the utility in 23. But from the PSC's perspective and how they calculate rate of return, those are not included on the revenue side. And they are including depreciation as an expense, which for cash flow purposes, it's not. And that's how you're coming up with the negative rate of return. But I did want to call that out, that we're not losing cash in this particular fund. So borrowing in 2022 for the North Water Tower and the water utility's share of the North Loop project added about $215,000 in interest costs. Technology investments for this fund increased by about $130,000 in 2023 compared to 22. That was something we had talked about with the council as part of our 23-24 biennial budget workshop process. That was one of our budget themes that we went over, was investments in technology, servers, cybersecurity, upgraded SCADA, things like that. And those costs get passed around to the rest of the city. And then that last category there, pilot, above net income or loss there, that's payment in lieu of taxes for folks that might not be familiar with that term. That's essentially a way of calculating what the utilities' property tax payment to the city would be, essentially. So our utilities, like any other business would, they benefit from, roads getting plowed, maintained, things like that. And it's actually a PSC requirement that electric and water utilities have to pay a pilot to the city. We actually have to provide them with a report every year showing what it was, how we calculated it. It's very formula driven. They've got a worksheet for it. It's kind of hard to mess up actually, but it's basically just the value of your utilities assets. You multiply it by the mill rate, and there you go.
It's just short of $1 million
total
between electric and water.
Yeah. So, and I guess I could have called that out back here because again, it is both a water and electric thing. So it's here too. So and then rate base for water has grown by 2.3 million since 2020. So that's going to be your new water tower. That's going to be North Loop. I actually even think the water utility has just a small piece of the North Interceptor project. So rate base has grown by 2.3 million. So then going over to wastewater, not PSC regulated, rate of return is not a thing for the wastewater utility. As I mentioned, we have local control, council does, over the rate process for wastewater utility. So how we are really considering this utility, we're considering it through the lenses of working capital policy that the city council set. 90 days of working capital is the requirement, and 1.5 times revenue debt coverage for our utilities. So those are the two lenses we're viewing this particular utility through. In addition to the effects of inflation, which is, happening across the board, across all city funds, the utilities aren't the exception, but certainly consideration. Costs to the utility associated with capital investments in the North Interceptor, North Loop, which we borrowed for in 2022, and the biosolids project, which we borrowed for in 2023, will push net income lower in the years ahead. That said, if you recall, we had a workshop back in March of 2022 where Trilogy Consulting came and gave us a presentation as we were deciding whether we wanted to stay in or leave the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids Facility Consortium. At the time, they provided some findings that as we get out toward 2028, 2029, maybe 2030, we would be looking at a point in time where we're likely well below our working capital policy for this particular fund, but that it would be worse and it would get worse sooner if we stayed in the consortium. So that was the impetus for us to, as I recall it, to leave that group. What we're seeing right now is that conclusion is essentially we still believe that we're right on track with that. The numbers obviously may be a little different now because we have a year of actual results under our belt. But directionally and timing wise, we're where we thought we would be when Trilogy came back in March of 22. And so the conclusion is also still the same, that we do believe that a future rate increase would be even larger if the city stayed with West Central Wisconsin Biosolids Facility. So then we're going to talk, get caught up here on my paper copy. We're going to revisit the assumptions, and then I'm going to be turning it over to Kevin after this. So just to revisit. So we aim to provide value for quality, reliability, and service. We're not aiming to just be the cheapest. Best overall value. Best overall value, recognizing that does come with some cost. We want to stay very aggressive on our preventative maintenance and in promoting economic development. You're going to see this come through on both the operating cost side of the utilities, on the expense side, because we are so proactive with our maintenance programming. And you're also going to see it come through on the revenue side, like we talked about with those three big buckets of how we say growth pays for itself, at least in part, which is bullet point number 3. So then moving on to bullet point number 4, knowing programming, rate philosophies, dividends, etc. What we're contemplating moving forward with as a set of assumptions is that we're really just truing up our rates, reflecting the fact that it has not occurred for a while, and we've been absorbing some years of really high inflation that have resulted in us being well below PSC benchmark rate of return. Absent change of some sort, we certainly would envision that trend continuing in the years ahead. And with wastewater, that is in fact still our conclusion, which was the conclusion Trilogy had arrived at a couple of years ago. Staff will seek to maximize the fixed charge portion of the rate structure. So when it comes to those PSC regulated utilities, there really is only so much control over that we're going to, in fact, we're not going to have much. We can request it. PSC doesn't have to do it. But as Kevin mentioned, as we move into a future where conservation is becoming more of an important thing, folks are starting to do more of it. We don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have a lot of fixed costs within our utility that still have to get paid for. That with more of the cost on the rate side of things and the consumption side, as consumption drops, revenue drops, we're not able to keep up with the needs for those fixed assets that are in the ground or overhead in the case of the electric utility. And so by moving more of the kind of the share of the rate structure onto that fixed portion, we're able to better keep up with kind of where we see things happening trending in the future from a consumption point of view. So then staff are not actively seeking a change in cost distribution between customer categories. And so part of the slides coming up here is Kevin will talk a little bit about where that's at right now. And even if we were to actively seek some sort of a change, again, the PSC doesn't have to take our advice. Once you initiate the rate case process, it's based on the numbers and their benchmarks. That said, we could still actively note that. We could still actively pursue that with Trilogy, since we do have local control over wastewater rates, but we're not planning on doing that. And staff intend to maintain volume discounts where applicable, as Kevin had discussed earlier. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin.
Oh, this gets good now because you're like, what does this all mean, right? Well, we have some, what do you call, how about this for hedging? Possible estimated utility bill increase. I'm trying to think of another adjective up there and go, maybe. So here's what we're looking at. So currently, an average electric user that uses 750 kilowatt hours a month, their current bill, this is usage and the $8 a month or $12 a month monthly fee, it's about $101. So possibly could be going to 104. So again, I guess now that I'm thinking about this, we kind of scared you and myself again. I look at that, that's not too bad, but it's a 2 to 4% increase potentially, possibly estimated. Water, $18 a month right now. This is the big one. On a percentage basis, it's a lot, going from 18 to 25. I'll give that some context with a slide coming up as well. And wastewater, again, 45 to 47. So that's kind of what we're thinking about on the three utilities. And below, there's electric is 2 to 4, water, a 40 to 50% increase, wastewater 4 to 6 is kind of what we're thinking then. So again, water, that's a scary percentage number, but the dollar number, is what it is. So we say, where do we stand? Where do we sit? Where do we stand in comparison to others with our electric utility? So there, River Falls, second one to the left. I wanted to get somebody that's local. The Richmond is to our left a little bit. Oconomowoc, which is a similar type growing community, and they're just to our right. And then the next 5 are all investor-owned utilities in the state. So our neighbor, Xcel Energy, Hudson is served by them. They're about almost $120 a month. So they're about $20 more a month than we are for a residential customer. And earlier I alluded to the fact Xcel does intentionally put a little more burden on their residential customers. Lion Energy, Wisconsin Public Service, Madison Gas and Electric, and We Energy is about $40 more a month than we're at today. This doesn't include rate increases that are in the pipeline for a lot of these as well. So pretty significant. Okay, water, I just said I showed you that big potential increase. Look over here. So there's almost not every city, but a large representation of cities across the state of Wisconsin. We're over here. And this is an annual number. So we're about $200 a year on third cheapest in the state right now. So with our proposed estimated increase, would keep us kind of in the lower third yet of all, but you can see that's about an $85 a year increase for a water user, typical water user. So you look at this too, you might even say that might be on the too far on the left end there, but that's where we're at today. Wastewater, we're kind of in the middle of the pack, kind of stay in the middle of the pack. In compared to some of these, Baldwin and Hudson, you're going to see some big increases because when we leave West Central Biosolids, some of these other communities are going to take on our burden, of which we're a 20% owner in right now. So I would assume some of that's going to be going up as well. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Josh after that is done. Go ahead, Josh, take it away.
Yeah, so another thing we just kind of wanted to talk about, sort of another version of assumptions here, is that staff assume and will certainly endeavor to try to meet the following cadence for rate adjustments moving forward, unless we hear otherwise. So for the electric and water utilities, we'd be looking at simplified rate cases every 2 years, and for the wastewater utility, we'd be looking to come forward to council with some recommended adjustments every 2 years as well. We envision this as being part of our biennial budget process or somehow sequenced in with that. We need to spend a little bit more time thinking through exactly how we want to sequence that with the biennial budget. But I thought I would pause here for a second and just talk terminology a bit. For folks that maybe aren't quite familiar with PSC terminology and such, a simplified rate case is essentially rate case light. So you're allowed, so you've got a full, or another way it's called is conventional rate case that you do. And then you have 5 years from that point, or if your cumulative increases from simplified rate cases over that time frame don't exceed, I believe, 40% from the original rate of the last conventional study. As long as you're meeting those two parameters, you can do a simplified rate case, which is, again, rate case light. It's pretty low on staff time, staff burden. It's a pretty quick, expedited process. Unfortunately, we're at a point for both electric and water where we're stuck doing conventional rate cases.
And we looked at that for water after our 2016 rate case. In about 2018, 2019, 2020, we looked at this expedited rate case, but we didn't qualify.
That's an important point. The simplified rate case is nice because it also just serves as a check-in from a PSC perspective, at least. Again, we've got working capital, revenue, debt coverage benchmarks internally. But then, of course, if you want to kind of see how you're doing from kind of a PSC rate of return perspective, those simplified rate cases are nice because they'll do that. And then they'll, like Kevin mentioned, we've been quite a bit higher than the benchmark in past years. So,
No, you're good. You're not going to do it.
yep, you're good. Just continue. So we're envisioning doing simplified rate cases every 2 years moving forward. And then same for wastewater. But again, not PSC regulated, but simplified rate case. So then our last slide here is just to talk next steps. So again, we're getting into the weeds a bit. There's this concept called test year. So for the PSC's purpose, if we want our application to be applicable to 2024, and in other words, when you say test year, what it's doing is it's taking into account your utilities assets that went into service by December 31st of that year. We would actually have to have the application submitted by August 1st. If you go beyond that, it just rolls to the next test year, which would be obviously 2025. And it just conceivably delays your rate implementation process, potentially significantly if you would just miss that cutoff. So we would endeavor to get those applications submitted prior to August 1st of this year. And from a project perspective, Man Valley, other large projects that we've had underway or still do have underway, we believe that those will all be in service in time to be included in the rate case structure. So the next step would be basically the PSC. They'll come up with their own separate rate study. So we submit an application of our financials. This is what we think it is. They basically do their own version of that. And then there will be an opportunity for us to provide feedback to the PSC. There is a public hearing process in Madison as part of all of this as well. And then ultimately the PSC at the end of all the process, there will be a whole bunch of back and forth emails between our staff, our consultants, and the PSC because it's essentially an audit. And it's not just an audit of our most recent year. They go back to your last rate case. And they'll audit all of those years. So it's a process, but then at the end of all of that, they'll issue a rate order that may or may not include the feedback we've given them. We can attempt to negotiate rate recommendations down. I have heard of it being successful, but they do not have to take it into consideration. I know I've said that probably 5 times now, but just an important point. So what we're looking for is to both check the assumptions that we've listed, and what I'll do after this slide is maybe just go back to that slide and just linger on it. So we want to check those assumptions with you all, and we're looking for group consensus to proceed with rate case applications, with having Trojan continue to do the rate study, the cost of service study for a wastewater utility. We'd be coming back to you all for formal action to submit rate case applications for the electric and water utility in a couple of months. We want to make sure we get it out ahead of that August 1st deadline. preferably then some. And then we'll also seek formal action for wastewater utility rates if the council desires, and we would be coming back with those at a later date, even since we do have local control over that. I would envision that just getting rolled directly into the budget process in the future. So in addition to, the various budget resolutions you're all adopting, this could essentially just be another one that's part of a budget adoption package. Is a practice I'm already familiar with from elsewhere. So that's kind of what I would envision for that. But if the council and the UAB did wish to proceed without one of the rate increases, some kind of internal conversations that we've already had with Scott, you may have some thoughts on this or not. But we have mentioned that this could be the one that we just wait on. If that would be the preference, we could wait a year or two.
I don't think they see your mouse, your pointer. Which one? This one right here at the bottom.
So if Councilor of the UAB wanted to wait on one of the three, we would recommend waiting on wastewater utility. And so, yeah, I think that's all I have. And so I'm going to go back to Kevin, unless you have any additional thoughts.
No, just on the PSC, I mean, again, we are giving our best projection of potential rate increases. PSC is going to do their own audit. They're going to have their own ideas. And sometimes they even change last minute. I just know one example. Last time in our final conversation, they had us at $12.50 for our monthly charge. And then when the final order came out, it was $12. So I don't know what happened between that, but they decided and that's what they wanted to do. So, I mean, we do negotiate, we do talk things through, but they do get the final say, and sometimes we don't agree. So that's really all I have.
Okay, so that's what we have for a formal presentation. I was just, like I mentioned, I'll just kind of linger on this assumption slide. But we're here for questions if you have them.
I saw pencils burned up notepads, so it'd be a good time to start questions.
I got a couple.
Yes.
Can you talk about, and I don't know if it makes sense to go back all the way back to the first slide there, Josh, with the rate cases, the last rate case?
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Kevin, you want to talk about when the last rate case was prior to those dates?
Yeah,
If I remember right, electric was like 2008.
it was, yes. I think it was 12 years, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So I got here in 2013, and it was well before the time I got here. So if you look at it that way, so since, 2008, 2008, there's only been one rate case.
Right.
That's crazy.
And there was a substantial jump.
That was a fairly substantial one. I think we're 8 or 9%, if I remember correctly, Scott,
So,
for a residential customer. Yes.
so keeping them, I guess my question was, we haven't done these frequently.
No, and we talked about that last time. I think that was kind of the message. Get on, do these more frequently, get on these. So we tried to do that with water, and like I had mentioned, because we fell out of the parameter for the expedited case, we couldn't do it, and then years pass, and then we're playing catch up again. But yeah, I think that should be the theme, right?
Well, I think that's the philosophy or the direction we have to give as council is, do we want more frequent, like we do with the budget? We want to be as constrained as possible, but we also don't want to defray a bunch of stuff and then have this big jump 3 years down or 5 years from a budgetary standpoint.
Yes.
I would think the same should apply to our utility rates.
Right. That's great.
I have a related, sorry,
No, go ahead.
well, it's a related question. How much time does it take to put these together?
So I was thinking about that as you were talking. So here's some good news on electric. Part of our WPPI fee, they do the cost of service study and kind of babysit it through the PSC process. So it does take Josh just to have a large amount of time to handle this. I don't know how many hours.
Those simplified rate cases, the nice thing about that is really all they're using for those are the annual report. So we have to file an annual report with the PSC every year anyways, for renewable water and electric. And when they do the simplified rate cases, they're really only taking into account the most recent annual report that you filed, and they're not looking that much more deeply than that. It's that conventional process that they really open the books and they go back years.
So that service we're getting from WPPI, we don't get that from water. We spend $20,000 to $30,000 with their consultant. Yeah. That's probably, but rounding up on that, because she's pretty affordable.
We also didn't do the simplified rate cases because with the interest environment on municipal bonds and the PSC's somewhat arbitrary methodology for rate of return, the rate of return would have been lower than what we were already approved for. So you'd spend all this money and time doing a rate raise, and they would say, well, we're gonna lower your rate of return, but yes, we're gonna give you more money because it's inflationary, and guess what, your rates are the same. So it was like, we were doing some staff calculations going, if we're at a 7% approved rate of return, and the current rate of return is 3.25%, they're gonna agree that our costs have gone up, but then they're gonna lower our rate of return, and so then we're basically about the same place we were. And I also remember the community made a lot of tough choices about growth pays its way, kids are gonna pay back interest, we're gonna use impact fees, and we're gonna close the power plant. There was all these decisions that were made that were really controlling expenditures, and we were better shape than what a rate review was probably gonna do.
And I'm not being critical that it took that long. I think it was good reason. I just don't want us to get in a spot where we've got these giant jumps.
So that's fair. I understand the assumption though. We're not assuming that we're automatically going to do the simplified rate case unless this group tells us to. We're trying to provide the context of why we're not just automatically doing it every year or 2 years, because staff is assuming that you want us to keep reviewing whether the time, money, effort, the trade is going to result in something that's beneficial. Understanding it's easier politically to do a 0.5% increase every couple of years than do a 4% increase every 8 years. But the same people are spending the money on all the studies and all that work. So we're thinking, well, yeah, it's harder news to deliver, but the overall value is better. We may be able to get finally on our simplified rate case, and you got to make a lot of assumptions. But if interest rate environment and stuff stays pretty similar, right? If the rate of return is 6 and 5 and 6 and 5 instead of 6 and 2 and going, then simplified rate cases will probably make some sense. You might get something in front of you that says, well, it's a 0.75, 1.5, 1.2% increase or whatever every couple years, which then doesn't add up to a 40% increase. And especially on the water, it's harder too because the rates are so low to start with. Just getting a few more dollars a month from a customer is a huge percentage increase, whereas wastewater and electric are basically asking customers for the same increase in real dollar. It's double the percent increase for wastewater to get a couple bucks because it's starting at 45. I mean, I don't have to explain to you all the math, but that's how we're at. Water is really relatively inexpensive because you're just paying for it to be delivered. If water is free, it's just how do you get it from the source to people's houses? Does that make sense on the rate of return and simplified? But I also think the decision makers, the utility commission, the utility advisory board, the council need to pat themselves on the back that these long range policies you put in place is why there's been little rate pressure over time, because we've managed expenses pretty well. We've grown revenue substantially. And so all that new growth is paid its capital. And then it starts contributing on day one to the operating costs that everybody was sharing. The day before, it was only 5 customers sharing that operating cost. The day after, it's 7 customers sharing that same. So you start to do fractional costs. The existing customers pay that fractional cost. So even if inflation gets up, we had the fractional reduction. Now we're just in an environment where the inflation is going faster than we're adding new customer rate base. It was a good run for a long time.
So Scott, let's see if I'm hearing you. I'm going to repeat that. So the spirit of what I'm hearing is more frequent rate cases of smaller percentage increases when it makes sense financially.
Yes, that would be my position.
Unless we hear from the UAB or the council that you just want an automatic, like go for a rate case every year. Now, there are utilities across the state that they have that policy. Like, we don't want staff's judgment, thank you. Not that you don't trust us, but you're just gonna have an automatic, like, it's almost like an audit or something that you get every year.
I would trust that the staff, personally, my position would be I would trust that the staff would bring it to our attention and they would keep an eye on it. That'd be my position.
And staff would opine that your staff is better suited to evaluate the health of the utilities than the PSC staff, especially given the current state of affairs with state employees. We're not calling the PSC for advice.
Just remember being a
There were days when I started this career where you did call the PSC for advice. They had people that had been doing it a long time, really understood what to run a local utility, understood the dynamics of utility boards and council. That is not who we're speaking with at PSC these days. Like, we're explaining what pilot is.
and the culture and that is of a particular community, which are all different. And I was on the phone arguing with them a little at the last rate case, and I said, "Have you ever been to River Falls?" And they said, "No." Then how do you know?
Do you know where it is?
Probably not. It's just something Eau Claire. All right, moving on. Josh, this is maybe geeky stuff between you and I. Your NERD calculation, which I know you love.
Boy,
I don't have a good handle on GASB, but I do on FASB.
you guys want to get a room?
Is there any accelerated depreciation in that calculation? Does that happen in GASB?
No.
Okay, so that's easy. That's done. Developer contribution of assets. There's no recognition when they give it to us, but what's the statute of limitation? When do we get to recognize that we accepted it? Because we have to maintain it. There's a cost there.
Yep.
So is it 3 years? Is it 2 years? Is it 5 years?
So so I guess I'm trying to think through the mechanics of how that would happen. So we accept it. It's not calculated in our rate base, but to your point, there's O&M involved. So you're seeing it flow through your net income just through your operating expenses. And then eventually you'll have to replace it. And at the point in time you replace it, your likely utility cash or borrowing to finance it. And then it comes onto the rate base.
So it doesn't come onto the rate base until we replace it?
Correct. I mean, you'll recognize the O&M cost just through your net operating income.
Okay.
But it doesn't factor into the NERB until you replace it.
Yeah, we don't get it. We don't get it to be paid for. And there are some cases where the developer will pay for it initially and another developer will pay for it the second time. And if that's the case, we don't recognize it either.
There likely is a point to kind of extrapolate out, I think, the thought process here, because I've thought about it a little bit, is they're likely in the future, years and years away from now, there likely will need to be some conversations, some strategizing around replacing those developer contributed assets to try to stagger when that rate base starts to kind of balloon on us.
Yeah.
Right now, those aren't factored in.
And then we have to make a decision too on lining and things like that. Like, at what point is it a replacement versus just a maintenance? Yeah, so the manholes are, when we do the manhole repairs, only 12 to 20 manhole repairs. I mean, assuming that was paid for by a developer at some point, depending which area of town it's in. When we do that, then we're probably getting it on our balance sheet and it's not being taken off. But until then, some of those 70.
So you've got all these subdivisions that's all contributed assets. We could find ourselves in a spot here if these
down the road.
And we do not use the PSC nor GASB's estimate of the value of our plant as an estimate of what condition we're in.
Okay.
It's not reasonably related.
Well, we
have our own O&M and preventive maintenance program. You don't say, well, we have $12 million of assets according to the PSCs, and we spent $2 million this year, so good for us, we did 1/6. That would not be a good way I wouldn't measure that. We might use it as a back of the napkin for staff or something, but if I'm looking high level, like, are we continuing our investment into this plant? I wouldn't rely on GASB because they don't know.
Okay, so they're not holding us to Gatsby either.
PSC has their own everything.
They just got a startboard or what?
So there actually is a conversion process. So, you know, you've got your governmental accounting, you've got your proprietary accounting, and then you go from your proprietary accounting to this kind of amalgamated PSC version of accounting. And there's a whole,
If they didn't like fund accounting, then they created their own exception. And if they didn't like the way asset was classified, then they just decreed across the state, you're all gonna classify that, even though GASB tells you this, or generally accepted practices tell you this, we don't care at the PSC, this is how you're gonna do it. And it's that bad.
Okay. I think we're more interested in people.
So we have about 15 minutes left, and so we probably have more questions.
One more question, go. There's a disconnect for me on that electric revenue slide where you showed that 23 actually decreased. How did our revenues decrease?
I have an answer for that.
PCAC.
Oh, okay.
So go ahead. It has to do with power costs. We had it, so in 2020, that one. Yeah, so we have a
PCAC, okay.
Yeah, so in 2022, we have very high power costs. It's an anomaly year. So we budgeted WPPI for very high power costs.
Okay.
To continue in 23, and it's
Yeah.
$4 gas.
And our friends at the natural gas company really took it.
Yeah, so hey, it's on PCAC, everybody noticed the last 2 months, got a credit. I didn't think you can call this.
Okay, thank you. I'm done. I'm done hogging up this.
Now ready to go.
None of us have any control over this, but with the rates of the electrical, water, and wastewater, I'm assuming you guys have conversations with St. Croix Gas about what their rate increases might be, just so there's like a generalized, are all of people's utilities at home going to go up this year?
We don't.
You don't have a conversation?
I think the simple answer is no. And I mean, I have a conversation with Mr. Feedback every year about say we don't do it in the sense of trying to figure out what our strategy is for rates.
Oh, no, that's not what I mean. I just wondered.
I would say this as an anecdotal, many utilities, Xcel Energy, for example, I think they're looking on almost 20% rate increase for residential. Moving in. So it's,
We know the rate requirement pressure is way up on all utilities.
transformers almost double the cost.
Put into co-ops, I expect they will do adjustments. Excel is already in for a rate case. St. Croix Gas was in for a rate case last test year, so that'd probably be coming through now. But I don't want to give you the sense that we kind of look at it and say,
No, that's not at all what I meant. More
What are you guys doing?
That might be good.
Yeah. That's not okay. But no, just if like when people are asking, we know that utilities are just going up in general, and here are some reasons why.
I think it's a good generalization. Utility costs are going up in general.
Along with
I'm gonna go
everything
back
else.
to the assumption slide. And
It's up to the fact that they'll, sorry.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a shock.
Other questions? Sean, then we'll look at
So, in a fee-based structure, citizens can be the target of monopolies when they change laws, and that means everyone else pays more for their energy or their water. What do we have in place that would actually protect the user rates and control those costs? So we continue having this good cost return like we've had in the future. So it stays fixed regardless who you are. There's no gaming of our system for our local government.
The answer is the Public Service Commission. That's why they're there. So the Public Service Commission is in place to protect the customer. That's their mission. So there's only, I believe, 2 or 3 states in the union that still set electric rates through a Public Service Commission. And I've even kind of lobbied to get away from that because I trust you all to make the rates. A lot of people in my industry say we like the Public Service because they hold us responsible to our customers. So they have the customer's best interest in mind. That's why they exist. So that I don't know if it's right or wrong answer, but that is their mission.
and don't undersell yourself. I mean, we have a 3-layer rate review.
Yeah.
You have the UAB that has a ordinance identified role, right? In reviewing that then it's council and it's PSC for those others.
Yeah.
So I think it's good. And that's why we're trying to be transparent about the assumptions, because we need to understand that there's different, you can pull levers and turn dials as the UAB and council, and you can make an impact on certain customers' bill. So if you told us that, you don't want to maintain volume discounts, you would like us to move towards flat rates. Now, first of all, we'd have to convince PSC, but you could probably get away with that at the PSC right now and say, well, we're going to charge $1.50 per thousand to everybody for no matter what you use. That would change the industrial, that the hospital, the school district, their bills would go way up, much higher, faster than the residential customer. So we're just trying to understand, and we want you to understand what's memorialized in your current rate structure. Now, this is not a comprehensive list of every lever and dial that you could pull or turn, but it's a pretty good list of events that would have a big impact on residential versus non-residential, volume versus non-volume, fixed versus variable, right? You can have the philosophy that everything could be variable and just pay for what you use. It makes the variable rate go up and the fixed rate go down. What we've heard from dialogue with you over the last few years is it's a public good and there's some fixed or stable cost to operate this and how much people use. If there's a charge just to have it available for people. Wisconsin and PSC has been really not aggressive at all on that. And really, we haven't changed our system. We're still a volume-based system. People aren't paying to have the system available to them. They're just paying for whatever they take off. But we want you to know that we're headed towards what we think is the direction you told us, which is try to do those rates. If the PSC is going to let us do much. But that's where we're headed. But you could say, no, we just want to do variable rates. We probably could get the PSC to approve it.
So Sean,
You also could eat more growth. You could decide that growth is good for all of us and it's better for us in the long run. It helps all ratepayers, so we won't be as aggressive on trying to recover from developers' new growth. We haven't heard you say, so I'm not putting this in any, but we haven't heard any of you say that. Not a single one that I know of. Have you had any UAB? Nobody's saying, hey, don't worry, let's try to get some new subdivisions and give them free pipes and whatever. So, but this is a big deal because if you changed any of them, it would change the impact on customers. We've also not wanted to do, so there's one in their dividends. Our utilities essentially are just covering their cost. There isn't a profit center mode of operation with them. The city, Big Brother, the mothership is not trying to pull a bunch of resources on utilities. We don't have that philosophy. There are cities across the state now that are starting to push harder on that, and you can even pay a dividend. So you can say, well, we're the owner of this utility, this wholly owned subsidy. We should get something back for that risk. Because the 6.5% is not, Kevin mentioned that, that's not a profit margin or a risk reward. That's just what they calculate on top of your assets you need to operate. So it's basically, rate of return is just the break-even point of the utility. It's a philosophy we've kept. We haven't changed that philosophy. So if you shifted more cost into some dividend, then it would have a higher rate impact.
But the PSC makes us charge the pilot.
The pilot is not optional.
Right. So it's
That I know of. I mean, I don't know of any cases where, I suppose you can go to them and say,
we wouldn't want this money.
the city's agreed they don't want the pilot. The general fund doesn't want the pilot. Can we not charge it? They might consider it. We'd spend a lot of time explaining what it is first.
so we have like 4 minutes. So Sean, I just want to just reiterate one more time. I trust you, the Utility Advisory Board, to make our rates better than I trust the PSC. But the PSC's sole mission is customer advocacy. That's what it is.
Does that customer advocacy include resource control?
Yes. That's why you're seeing tiered rates that they want, things like that, to try to discourage usage of water and things like that. So, yes.
And future planning?
Yes. So they're big advocates for that. Yes. Your questions?
That was good, Kevin, thank you. As a new member, is there any possibility that we can get a hard copy of this? I'd like to study it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And then this is,
I'll have that sent out.
and this is recorded, so all of this meeting is available to the public. It's out live now, and then it's available. And then if you have additional follow through on any particular thing, or if you say, you know, I really want to know more about this new growth. Does it really pay for itself? And you want to have a one-on-one meeting with Josh or Kevin or myself and go through it. That's helps us sharpen the pencil. So that's fine too. And if you don't, it's not like you're derelict in your duty. If you don't request a whole bunch of meetings with us, it's okay too. But if you have an interest, we'll make time.
Yeah, but do you get everything you needed from us?
No, I was just gonna, I think let's have one more question. I was gonna ask you, Mayor, I was gonna say, I want you to find out if our assumptions are correct.
We'll just run.
So let's have one more question.
With the rate increases and, you know, everything is, just like Todd said, everything is getting more expensive. I know that you guys have a very healthy and in a good way program for families and residents who need assistance. Will the rate increases, do you see that there will be more people reaching out to you, and can the utilities cover that? I don't know the right term for that. Do you have the resources to cover if more people need assistance?
We will continue to help customers achieve bill payment. We send them to all different advocacy. What's our list of different agencies?
There's at least a dozen.
Yeah, so a dozen agencies we connect them with, bill payment assistance programs, all that stuff.
Sure.
I would probably be anecdotal to say if the costs go up or more people are gonna have trouble paying, I guess that might be possible.
Yeah.
It would be a good assumption to say yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And to your question about would we have enough resources, we are not calculating in any of our estimates, like more support, more subsidy or discounts. And with the two regulated utilities, we're not allowed to. So you can, again, turn some dials or pull some levers that might have what I would consider more income constrained households or customers. But you're probably not going to be able to say, well, we just want to provide, can we hold back, 12 cents per bill per customer and create another pool? That's not something that's kind of an automatic in these rate cases. The only one you could really do that is with sewer. I mean, sewer, if the council and UAB said, if you can't afford it, we'll just waive your bill, you could do that. With water and electric, even when we try to waive bills, the PSC is kind of in our business going, that's not fair to everybody else that pays. So, and it's not consistent with what policies you've said either. So,
Sean, is there a point when you move forward and use chickens in a more phased approach like we're talking about, where it could be too much on interest and bonding, and then the reverse where it's too little? So I guess what I'm asking is this stability planning. Is this the soft spot where we should want it, where it's going to save us on the interest on the bonding? And how did you come to that determination, Josh?
Yeah, I think so.
I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, why now? Essentially, the why now is when I look at kind of our 5-year trend of where, because obviously we don't have to do a rate case. The PSC's not coming saying, hey, it's been so many years, you need to come to us and ask. It's really us kind of looking at the fact that we are below the rate of return for water, and that's more recent. Electric's been a little longer that we've been below the rate of return. So it's recognizing that we are significantly below that benchmark. And when we're looking at kind of our internal modeling of where we think we're going 5 years out, 6 years out, 7 years out, from both a working capital and revenue debt coverage perspective, that's really where I'm kind of seeing this convergence of, okay, we're below benchmark, and this doesn't appear to be a sustainable trajectory from a cash flow and revenue debt coverage perspective. There's no crisis mode. We're not in any sort of an emergency here, but this is us trying to, in my opinion, this is me kind of, I guess, putting up that flag saying, hey, I've identified a trend here that doesn't appear sustainable.
Well, we're thinking responsible for the utility and for the city. So Mayor, we're out of time. We want to just get a temperature of the room to see if our assumptions that we have in line with what people are thinking.
Is everybody agreeing that the assumptions they are assuming are correct? Everybody okay with that? There you go, Kevin.
Yep, thank you.
Josh, can you continue your magic?
We'll proceed.
And you'll see them, like they said in the beginning of the presentation, this is kind of the beginning of the process. So we look forward to more presentations.
Yeah. I thought it was an excellent presentation.
Yeah, it was very good, guys.
Break. Yeah, I like it. See?
Yes,
Kevin, I think you're wrong about the program. We need a rural suicide prevention. So we do. It's a lot of us. 65%.
And then I heard it, and I was like,
Make your